Morning. Well, as I stated last week, I'm answering a question that I received recently, and I wanted to give it its due diligence. So I wanted to move question and answer to this week and answer this question specifically. It's something I've preached before from the pulpit here, and I believe it was probably a year ago or so, a year and a half. And as I looked at this question, I thought to myself, it has something to do with a portion of life that is a very visceral subject for us. Something that causes great, deep emotional feelings and issues in our life where we just feel something very strongly about it. Maybe we feel something very negative about this. The text reads, as Dale read already, and I want to reread it just one more time, in Matthew chapter 5. It says, "You have heard that it is said in the days of old," Dale did a better job reading it than I did, "You shall not commit adultery. But I say unto you, that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her or after her has already committed adultery with her in his heart." Matthew 5, 27 and 28. And this is a subject that preachers don't like to preach on. In fact, I would have probably waited another year or two probably if this question hadn't been in my box. But I want to take a moment, and it won't be a long, drawn-out sermon this morning, and clarify the connection here with Matthew 5 and Matthew 19. I want us to understand that this is a thought process that's right in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount, and it's towards the end of chapter 5, and it's before 6, which 6 is the Sermon on the Mount continued in Matthew chapter 7, but it's part of God telling us how we ought to live and how we ought to act and conduct ourselves that we might be saved. The question that I was asked was worded in just this fashion, and this is quoted from the paper I received. "If your spouse has committed adultery in his or her heart, is this biblical grounds for divorce?" Well, I think we need to define first what adultery is, and then ask ourselves if we can do that only in our heart. So point number one, this is an issue of adultery. It's really adultery of the heart, isn't it? It's the point where someone decides or thinks about committing this act of sin or this sinful act. And so when I asked this, I looked at the Strong's definition, and the noun word for moikos, it denotes one who is unlawful, meaning there's, what sin is transgression of the law, meaning there's a bond or a binding situation here, either marriage or with your relationship with God, but it's unlawful intercourse with the spouse of another. A man or woman having intercourse of any type with someone that is not their spouse, period. I wonder why this subject is so discussed, argued, dealt with, and causes so many fights and problems with people, when it seems very clear to me. And the more I study it, the clearer it gets. That adultery is what I said. I don't want to use those words all that often from the pulpit with such young ears, but you know what I mean. It's sex outside of marriage. It means outside of the bond that you have with a person, or it's also like porneia or fornication. It's with no bond at all, and you just have two people taking part in that activity. I looked at unbiased sources, and again, even worldly sources indicated this definition to be this. But while I was studying this, I understood or began to think about what is Christ talking about, what is He telling us, and it goes beyond what I said last time I preached about this. If you change the wording of the verse here and you understand it to be this way, but I say unto you that whosoever looketh upon ham and eggs to lust or to eat ham and eggs hath not already eaten ham and eggs, right? They haven't eaten them, they're not full, they haven't received them as nourishment. All they did is look onto them, and they lusted. You've ever seen some pancakes? Cracker Barrel makes some good pancakes. They got a crust around the edge, and they got a lot of butter, and I think they put vanilla in that. I'm not sure. But I can see a picture of Cracker Barrel's pancakes, and I can want to eat them. But I don't have the calories from just looking at them. I've got to go there and eat them, right? And that's the simplistic way to break down this verse. But in a greater sense, we're talking about issues of the heart here. And so adultery in this verse does not apply for divorce or grounds for divorce, but adultery is, in Matthew 19, the very grounds for it. Look in Matthew 19 with me. We'll look at the first, the 6 verses, 3 through 9. The Pharisees also came unto him, tempting him, and saying unto him, Is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause? And he answered in verse 4 and said unto them, Have ye not read that he which made them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, For this cause shall a man leave father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. Wherefore they are no more twain, but one flesh. That whatsoever or what therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. Therefore they say unto him, Why did Moses then command to give a writing of divorcement, and to put her away? And he said unto him, now watch this, Moses, because of the hardness of your heart, suffered you to put away your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. And I say unto you, now here it is, the exception, what adultery is. Whatsoever ye shall, or what I say unto you is, whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication, that's sex outside of marriage, that's porneia, and shall marry another, committeth adultery, and whoso marrieth her which is put away doth also commit adultery. And so then you back it up and you go back to our text in Matthew chapter 5, and you have what we've just read in Scripture, that illicit sexual contact with the person outside of marriage is that exception that says, you know what, I'm not for it. And God says, in fact, in Micah, he said, God hates divorce. It's not what I want to happen. It's not anything that, even in Matthew 9, he says, you know what, Christ said, it wasn't that way from the beginning. This is not what I wanted. Because of the hardness of your hearts, this happened. God doesn't have any desire for divorce. But because of man and sin, it occurs. But outside of all of that, you go to Matthew chapter 5, and you begin in our text here in verse 27. You've heard it said that of them of old time thou shalt not commit adultery. And then verse 28, our text, it says, But I say unto you that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. Verse 29 says, And if thy right eye offend thee, pluck it out and cast it from thee. For it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast into hell. And if thy right hand offend thee, cut it off and cast it from thee. For it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that the whole body should be cast into hell. But now watch verse 31 and 32. It hath been said, Whosoever shall put away his wife, let him give her a writing of divorcement. But I say unto you, that whosoever shall put away his wife, saving for the cause of illicit sex, fornication, illegal meaning unlawful, causeth her to commit adultery. And whosoever shall marry her that is divorced committeth adultery also. So adultery is that contact outside of marriage, the bonds of marriage. And porneia or fornication is oftentimes substituted for that. But what are we looking at here? That's what adultery is. But in Matthew chapter 5, the issue is of thoughts, not of actions. Of thoughts. And I really spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I don't want y'all to know the thoughts that I've had. You don't want all of us to know all the thoughts that you've ever had. as a young person, even as an adult, we've all probably thought some things in our lives that we wouldn't be proud of. There are dangerous and even sinful thoughts. Have you ever thought about really taking it out on someone, just beating the mess out of them? One man I used to know, he used to say, "I'd like to beat the brakes off that guy." I always thought that was a pretty good analogy. Shake him up so hard his wheels come off, right? I'm not going to tell you, but there was a preacher friend of mine, and you can ask him after services if you want to, but he said that one guy told him about beating a guy with a pine knot. May have been Bobby Tatum. But anyway, he wasn't talking about beating somebody or wanting to beat somebody. He was just saying, he was illustrating a point to me. And if I remember the story correctly, maybe somebody told him that. But anyway. What about just cheating on a test? You ever thought, "Oh, I'm going to fail this test"? And you said, "Man, I'd just like to cheat on this test. If I could just look over on somebody's paper or get through with this." Yep, right? We think about that. Think about making life a little easier. What about desperate people? Anybody in here ever been so desperate that you fantasized about, what if I could just rob a bank? Right? Now, I'm not saying you wanted to rob a bank. What about somebody ever gotten so dark about something? Now, this is a serious subject. And so serious thoughts go along with it. You ever wanted to harm someone? Maybe even take their life? Commit murder? You know, those are all things that we, at some point, and you've got your own things you've thought about. "Oh, I'd love to go out and do this." In reality, you know better and you're not going to. But is a thought a sin? Can I think about things that are wrong and not be sinful? Now sometimes, and I'm going to show you later, absolutely, I can have thoughts in my mind that are sinful. I can think things that are sinful and wrong. But just a whimsical thought about something. You know, if I think about robbing a bank, they can't come arrest me. I can't get into legal trouble. It's not legally binding. We're not talking about things that are sinful or thoughts in a sinful way, but thoughts that are binding or actions that are binding. I can't help but think about David and Bathsheba. You know what it was with David is he was just a man. And I remember looking at this lesson, and there was a picture came up, and I would not suggest you look at the internet about adultery, but if you're doing a lesson about it and you want something, you're going to run into some things you don't want to see. And one of the sayings was, "You may say no, but she hasn't asked you yet." And then I could tell there was a picture below it, and so I just went on to the next thing. I can imagine, you can imagine what the picture was. Saying no is something that we can say we're going to do, but the action is so much more important, isn't it? You know, if David, probably a lot like you and I, guys, saw a beautiful woman bathing on the next rooftop, and he was looking down, and she was well-pleasing to look at, and if he had just thought, "Boy, I'd like her to come see me," I'm just going to leave it right there. If he said, I wish she'd come see me, visit with me, and he went on about his day, Nathan would have never had to have told him, "Thou art that man." He would have never had to have most likely lost his son to illness. He'd have never had to kill Uriah the Hittite in the way he did and lie about it and connive and conceive. he would have never been judged in the fashion that he was judged, because we all know that Bathsheba did come see him. So we're talking about issues of adultery and its thoughts, not actions. But there's another part of this. In Proverbs 23 and verse 7 says it's an issue of the heart. Now it can become sinful. Now this verse is not something that just tells me, well, I shouldn't think about that or I shouldn't do it. And it's definitely not telling me I can just get divorced because of something I've seen or thought. But Proverbs 23 and verse 7 says, in the first part of the verse, for as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. What's that telling us? You know, I've probably thought to myself, and you may have thought this before about me, I don't know, but you ever had a negative thought about yourself? Self-doubt? So I'm no good at that. Really, you're probably pretty good at it. You just messed up, right? Or you had a hiccup, did something wrong. But in reality, that's not who you are. That thought is not who you are. So how does this verse jive or work with what we're talking about? As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he? No. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. It's something that if I'm going to determine, and the big scope of my life is I'm going to be a faithful Christian, guess what? In my heart I'm a Christian because I'm faithful. I think it in my heart, and then I do it. That's what this verse is a lot like. If I think in my heart that I'm going to go and I'm going to do that, and there's an intent in this verse, it says to lust after her. If a man, not only does it say to look at a woman, so it's not saying that it's sinful to look at a woman, because God made women beautiful and made you to look at and made you to be appreciated, and we'd be silly if we didn't recognize that as men we love to see women. We love you ladies. And God made you to be, like Christ, or like Adam said when he called woman, he said, whoa man, right? It's supposed to be beautiful. We're glad to see you. But it's the intent, isn't it? It's that intent that he not only looks on a woman, but he does so to lust after her. It's a matter of his heart. I was reading about a study that was done at the Cambridge University. A psychiatrist, Valerie Voon, she was talking about endorphins. And they measured the activity in the brain. And for a long time we were told that by 6 years old, our brains were hardwired. That's who we were going to be. We're molded and shaped, and much of our molding and shaping comes by 6 or 7 years old. But science shows us now that we're not hardwired. That our brain, and I wrote this word down, it's neuroplastic. Our brains are neuroplastic. It means they change with new experiences. The very structure of our brain changes with new experiences, no matter how old we are. And so they did a study and they took pictures of these changes. And do you know that heroin addicts' brains changed very similar to people or men that were addicted to pornography? Changed very similarly. In that reward center is what it's called. In the reward center of the brain, it changed just like somebody experiencing a high off of a drug. And I want us to be warned by this. It's a matter of the heart. And the study just was, it was terrible, because it said every time you look at this, they have to go cold turkey. They have to get away from it entirely, the idea of pornography, because it's a growing thing, just like a drug habit. And so as I was thinking about this, it's a matter of the heart. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. This can become very sinful to look upon a woman, but then to lust. Let me encourage you, young men, and I'm running out of time. This is such an important topic, but train your neck to turn your head when it doesn't want to turn. Just train your neck. But have a habit not to not notice a beautiful woman. I don't mind if Amanda sees me. I'll even tell her once in a while, boy, so-and-so looked really nice today. And that's exactly how I mean it. But then there's times when I see things unintentionally by that person or myself, and I've got to have a twitch in my neck, right? I got to turn my head quick. Something's got to happen, right? Every one of us has that, I hope. Ever want to do this, guys? Right? Because there's too much showing. You got to train yourself to turn away, to watch out for those things, so that your heart doesn't get in a place where you're looking at a woman, but now you're doing so to lust. Matthew 15, 17, and 20 says this, do you not yet understand that whatsoever entereth the mouth goeth out of the belly and is cast out with the drunk? But verse 18 says, but those things which proceed out of the mouth are from the heart, and they defile a man. For out of the heart proceeds evil thoughts, murders, adultery, fornication, theft, false witness, blasphemies. These things are which defile a man. In the days of Noah, it says their hearts were on evil and their minds were on evil continually. Adultery is sex outside of marriage. And in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 28, it's a thought. It's not an action. It's an action that causes something where we can divorce, but this is a thought. I'm thinking about doing something. And it has no regards, or it's not in regards to whether or not a person has a biblical right to divorce. That's different. But it also is bigger than that. If your heart's there, it's a matter of salvation. It's a heart issue, and it becomes a matter of salvation. Ask yourself this. Why in the middle of how it is that we could be divorced, in Matthew 5 verse 32, except for fornication or adultery, you can divorce, just like Matthew 19 verse 9. And then before that, in Matthew 25 and verse 27 and 28, it talks about looking upon a woman, lusting after a woman. Why in the middle of that, verse 29 and 30, does it say, if thy eye offend thee, pluck it out? It's better to lose an eye and go to heaven than to be lost. What about a hand? And I think it's not lost on me that it's an eye to see and to lust after. And it's not lost on me that it's a hand to touch and to get things that you shouldn't. But if your hand offends you, cut it off. Go to heaven without one hand. Why would that be? Ask yourself why that would be in the middle of that. Jesus is preaching Sermon on the Mount about how it is we ought to be saved. How it is we ought to live so that we can be saved. And if you're thinking about wrong things, and he makes a long list prior to this and after it, but if you're thinking about a woman in the wrong way, you can be lost for that. Boys, you can be lost for that. Treat them like the treasure they are. Don't look on a woman to lust after her. I promise you, Hebrews 13 and verse 4 said that the marriage bed is undefiled. There's a place for rejoicing with the wife of thy youth, Proverbs 5 and verse 18. There's a place for those emotions and those feelings and that intimacy. It's not with someone who's not your spouse, though. Christ is teaching in this lesson. He's touching on a lot of subjects. But most importantly, he's saying how we ought to look upon women. And it's not to lust after them. But this is not grounds for divorce. Actual contact, adultery, is the only reason, biblical reason God has given us. Now, I said at the beginning of this, it's a very visceral thing. It's something that, it's like talking about cancer. Talk about cancer with me, and I start thinking about my dad. Talk about divorce. I start thinking about members of my family, my mother and my biological father. Very visceral feelings and emotions. I'm sure it's the same with you. You know someone that is going through this, or you yourself have dealt with this. Don't allow even something this difficult to get in the way of your salvation. Figure out what adultery is. Understand that our thoughts have to be pure, and that when we live our lives, it must be from the heart. And those things that come out of our mouths are from the heart, and they are that which defile a person. And make sure you're saved. Make sure you're living the way that Christ is exhorting us to on the Sermon on the Mount. Now, I've got the question and answer box back there. This has probably just added more questions to the box. So if you have questions or thoughts or want to talk to me about this, I'd be glad to study with you, glad to visit with you. Thank you so much for being patient with the photographer, the picture this morning. I think that was important. And also, thank you for listening to this difficult sermon to listen to, as well as difficult to deliver. Love all of you and appreciate all of you. If I can do anything for you this morning, maybe to help you be in a right relationship with God, maybe to get back in that right relationship with God. If you have a need, let me encourage you to come as we stand and as we sing.